Hello and welcome to the Cube Vanguard. This is take number 3. It's been one of those days. Take number 1, I had a problem with my Cube config file and I did something silly. Instead of making a backup of it, I just decided to fiddle with it first, thinking it'd be an easy fix. And I fiddled it to death, so I had to restart my entire cluster. And this was while I was filming because I thought I'd have a troubleshooting session. Remember, always keep a copy or make a copy of your configuration files if you're going to fiddle with them. Okay, so I finally got that all fixed, started the recording again, got to the point where I had to show the cluster, and my internet went down, so I couldn't pull the images down. Quite annoying. This is take number 3. I have crossed my fingers. All right, what are we talking about today? Well, first of all, I'll just mention that this week I was in Columbus, Ohio. I'm certain that thrills everybody. Well, it should, because that is where one of Veeam's offices is. And I was there for a community summit. We discussed what we're going to do in the community, the Veeam community, other communities which were there as well. I won't mention it. I don't want to spoil anything for later, but it was a lot of fun, and it reminded me again that you get a lot of really good work done when you're around smart, fun, and enjoyable people, and that's what it was. Okay, and I also had on the flights back, because I had to fly to Washington, then to Toronto, I had empty seats, so it was extremely good. It's like one of those Economy Plus where they, say, do you want Economy Plus for $80 more? And you say no, and guess what? The neighbor doesn't show up, so I get it anyways. Haha. All right, so this week we're talking about Ingress at last. Ingress, and let's go to the documentation right away, as we always do when we decide to talk about something in Kubernetes, because that's where the source of truth is. Okay, so right from the get-go, people sometimes find Ingress complicated, and it doesn't make things any better when you see a note like this. Note, Ingress is frozen. Now, it is January in Toronto, so that would be normal if it was outside, but that's not the case here. What it is that they're introducing in the future, well, they've already introduced it now, but I wouldn't use it yet in production, something called Gateway API, which eventually, I guess, is going to replace Ingress. Another way of doing the same thing Ingress does. Okay, so what is Ingress? So don't worry about that now. You still need to learn Ingress because it's going to be used for, I'd say, quite a while. And it's worth knowing because the Gateway API will probably be similar in some aspects. I haven't really looked at it much. What is Ingress? Well, Ingress exposes HTTP and HTTPS routes from outside the cluster to services within the cluster. So it's built on top of services, and it makes it much more convenient to connect to services, because you don't need, let's say, an IP address for every single different type of service you have there. You can use Ingress, okay? Traffic routing is controlled by rules defined on the Ingress resource. And here's a simple example of Ingress. It sends all its traffic back to one service. So there could be multiple services, but this is one service. So here it is. The client goes to a load balancer. You still need a load balancer, Ingress, routing rule, and then to a service, which can be backed by one pod or many pods, okay? Okay, that's what we're going to, well, we won't stop yet on that. There's one very important thing to mention. And by the way, you can have HTTPS as well. So you can do secure HTTPS and or just HTTP. Of course, for the internet, you're going to use HTTPS. If it's coming from outside, I'd always use HTTPS. But there's one caveat. And the caveat is that if you install a default Kubernetes cluster, there is no Ingress controller installed by default, which means if you create an Ingress resource, nothing's going to happen. You have to install one. Now, K3S, which I like to use, or Rancher Desktop, does come with traffic already installed. So you're all good there. But you could install other ones if you had K3S, or if you had K8S, or even K3S if you disable traffic. Nginx, Ingress controller, Contour is another one. There are a bunch of them out there, and they all work really well. But the Ingress resource itself is going to be similar, the same. There are slight differences sometimes in the syntax of the manifest that you've got to keep in mind. But once you choose one, you kind of get used to it. All right, so let's go over to our terminal where we will check out an Ingress. Now, what I've done here, as you can see, is I've got an Nginx pod running. I love Nginx static website because it's easy to get to and figure things out. And I've already created there an Ingress, okay? So it's in, the Nginx is in the Nginx namespace. And let's see the service. Okay, get svc in Nginx, and we will see the service. Now, K, again, I'll remind you, is an alias in Linux. So instead of typing kubectl, what I've done is gone into my bash RFC file and added alias K equals kubectl. That way I don't have to type it out. And I also added auto-completion. I showed you that in another show. So what do we have here? Well, we have a service, and it's a cluster IP service, right? And remember from last time we talked about that. Cluster IP service, you cannot, it's not exposed. It's not exposed outside of the cluster. So it can only be talked or contacted within the cluster. And yet I have an ingress, okay? So let's take a look. Okay, get ing for ingress in Nginx. And you will see my ingress, which I created beforehand. Now you see the class there is traffic, because that's the ingress controller I'm using, and I called it Nginx Inc. Okay, so what should be able to happen here? Well, I should be able to take that address there, okay, it's the English address, and I should be able to go back to my web browser. Let's go back there for a second and just see if this is going to work. And if I do this, so now this is going to be HTTPS. Yes. I press that. Look at that. Not private. That's fine. Boom. Welcome to Nginx. Okay. So there's your ingress right there. Now, keep in mind, said Jeff, you need a load balancer. Well, again, Rancher Desktop comes with something called Clipper. I think it's called Service Load Balancer now. It's not as powerful as, say, MetalLB, but for a single node cluster, it works fine. So it is actually there. So that's what it's leveraging. So you do need that load balancer to be present for it to be able to send it out. But there we go, Nginx. So there it is. So let's take a look. Go back so that proves that it's actually working. Let's go back now to our terminal, and we will check out what exactly is that ingress. Okay, so let's do k describe, and it's a very simple one, ing in the namespace Nginx. And what are they called? Nginx ing. Okay, didn't have to type that all out. I could use auto completion, but all right, very simple. Okay, it's in the namespace Nginx. Has to be in the same namespace as a service. The ingress class is traffic because that's the ingress controller I've got. Default backend, but what is that backend? Okay, the path. Okay, that's just the path could be different. So you might have in your Nginx or in your web server, whatever you've got, whatever application, you might have like a path called foo and a path called bar or something like that, and that would point to different ports. Okay, so you see the power of this. But in this case, it's very simple. All right, and you could have a host name there, so you could put a DNS name. I've kept it as simple as possible. So that's all it's doing. It's basically connecting up to the application through the ingress. Okay. Now, how did I create this? Well, let's pull the manifest out. And this is another little good lesson to know. You can pull the manifest out. So let's get ing from Nginx. And it's Nginx ing, which it should find it here, and do an OYAML, and that will pull out the manifest, right? So if we do this, and I push this into a file, Nginx ingress, we'll call it that, so I don't make a mistake what it is, YAML, that'll push that all into that file, and then you've got a manifest file that we can actually look through ourselves in Vim. And there we go. So it's networking, KDES IO version 1, ingress, there's the name, Nginx, namespace, Nginx ing, I'm sorry, the namespace is Nginx, ingress class name, traffic, and here are the rules. So it's HTTP. All right. Now, the thing is, it says HTTP here, but it's actually traffic is making that HTTPS. That's another, we won't talk about that right now, but that goes a little bit deeper. But this is just for the simplicity's sake. And the important thing to remember that the back end of this, okay, is that it's connecting to the service, okay? Because just like services connect to pods and they do it through namespace or through selectors and labels, remember from last time? Well, here, it actually names the service. So there's a service called Nginx. We saw that. There it is. And it tells us the port. Okay. And that's how it's connecting up to that. If I change that, this will no longer work. Okay. All right. So that's it on Ingress. As for the Gateway API, maybe I'll just show you what it looks like quickly for the fun of it in the documentation. And it is coming. So, you might want to start studying right now. Let's go take a look. So Gateway API, I suspect quite similar. I haven't actually looked at it very much yet. Hopefully my internet has not gone down. Did I press it? Let's just do there we go. So it's hold Gateway API. Okay, so role-oriented. Wow. Nice and simple, right? There's a gateway class, gateway, HTTP root. So yeah, it's kind of, so there you go. HTTP root, gateway class. Guess I get it. I don't know. Anyways, never fear. It always looks complicated at first. Later it gets easier. Maybe we'll talk about that another time. But for the time being, that was Ingress. And that's it for this week. We're going to keep it short and simple since I did this 3 times. Alrighty, we'll talk to you next week on the Kube Vanguard.